Welcome, everybody, to the 39th episode of Stories from the Last Territory, a podcast or a bi weekly podcast that covers the golden years of wrestling in the island of Puerto Rico. My name, like always, is Luis Cuevas, better known as the Caveman, and I am your host for this trip back in time to the greatest feuds in the history of Puerto Rico, of some of the greatest stories of the golden years of wrestling in the island. If you like what you hear and see, please subscribe to in YouTube at this channel, Desde los Territorios, or in audio at Spotify as Stories from the Last Territory. Today we're gonna be answering a question that a listener of the podcast sent to me the other day, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about it. A listener asked me if in Puerto Rico we were also influenced by the rock and wrestling connection that kind of took over wrestling in the mid 80s, 84 to 86, with the Rock and Roll Express, the Wendy Richter, the Cyndi Laupers, and the WWF, and so and so. Oh, that it didn't happen as it was a Spanish country. And the answer is yes. We were very much influenced by the rock and wrestling connection in some way or the other. And today, like I mentioned, I decided to talk a little bit about some of those tag teams and how they fare in the island, how some of the wrestlers that use this gimmick of rock and rollers and use music to present themselves as this rock and wrestling connection. So I figure it'll be a nice and something different to talk about, comparing to the gory feuds that we have sometimes here in Capital Sports Promotion. One thing I want to start by saying is that in Puerto Rico, since the early 80s, 82, 83, we start using vignettes of music in the vignettes of the packages for the wrestlers that were coming in the island. And we use a lot of heavy metal and rock songs for a lot of the wrestlers. For example, Abdullah the Butcher used the song Hunger by King Cobra. Brody used the song Naughty Naughty by John Parr, I think is, and we're using those vignettes. And for example, Chiqui Star, for his weekly segment called the Chiqui Star Sports Shop, used Damage Incorporated by Metallica. So we were always influenced in one way or the other by heavy metal or rock music. In Puerto Rico, we have a very eclectic taste of music. One moment we could be listening to Iron Maiden and Kiss. The next minute we could be listening to salsa and merengue, or we could be listening to reggaeton, and then back to Metallica. It's just the way we have been. It's a melting pot of music, as we have radio stations that cover all types of music. And that's also influenced in wrestling. So just wanted to throw out that out there because I think it's very important that the fans know, yes, we do have a lot of rock and roll stations in the island. Not as much as before, but we still have some. But anyway, we're talking about wrestling here, not music, right? And the first influence of rock and roll with in-ring action was a tag team called the New York Rockers, or the Rock and Roll Rockers. I don't know why they used the Rock and Roll Rockers, kind of, but anyway. And this was the tag team of Al Perez and Jumping Joe Savoldi. They quickly became the number one babyface team of the young fans, and it was something that was needed at that time because we really had like the Invaders of the world, the Carlos Colon of the world, the Pierre Martels, all these older wrestlers, and Miguelito Perez and Huracán Castillo, for example. They were not ready yet. They had just started wrestling. So a tag team like Art Perez and Jumping Joe Savoldi was something different for the fans of the island during that time. They would come and they would wear bandanas and go to their interviews dressed like Miami Vice, as Miami Vice was like a big deal. They also sometimes would carry a boom box, and they were more in the Miami Vice dress style than the usual, like the Rock and Roll Express or the Midnight Rockers or tag teams like that. They quickly moved on the ranks and won the World Wrestling Council World Tag Team titles for Black Gorman and Super Medico Uno, and defended the titles not only in Puerto Rico, but also in the ICW promotion of Angelo Savoldi as part of the exchange of talents both companies had during this time. They had a pretty good feud against the Cheap Herders. They lost the title against the tag team of Angel Mexicano and Fidel Sierra. Shortly after that, both left, Perez to Mid-South Wrestling and Savoldi to the ICW and later to Portland, where he created the SNS Express, a tag team that's one of my best friends favorite, Luis Gomez, also does the podcast with me in Spanish. He hates the SNS Express. But anyway, Perez returned to the island in 1986 and had an incredible feud with none other than Invader One that we have covered in this podcast. So check it out and you're going to find it. Uh, the second tag team that was incredibly successful in the island, and to this day is one of those things that I still don't get it. I scratch my head how this tag team became such a popular tag team. And we're talking about the Rock and Roll RPMs, the tag team of Tommy Lane and Mike Davis. So you might have seen them in Memphis, you have seen them in World Class as Rule Breakers, but in Puerto Rico, they were loved. They were like probably one of the top tag teams ever to wrestle as a fan favorite here in the island. Uh, it was weird for me because I had seen Tommy Lane and Mike Davis both in Jim Crockett Promotions and in Florida Wrestling, both as undercard wrestlers. But man, I mean, I cannot, say nothing but great things when they came here, and they just clicked big time with the fans in the island, who took to them in a way that, I mean, honestly, you have to see it to believe it. They were like the Rock and Roll Express in Crockett. That's how popular they were here in Puerto Rico. For some reason or another, I still don't get it. I don't know, but it worked for them. They had three big feuds in the island, one over the World Tag Team titles against Eric Embry and the Crusher. That was a very good feud with both teams going back and forth over the titles with Sacha, who was Eric Embry's valet during that time, interfering constantly in the matches. And this led to Mike Davis and Tommy Lane talking in their interviews about bringing it back up as surprise. And they will play the song, the Girls Want to Have Fun song. And Hugo, who was married to that person, saying, "Oh, I know who that songs belong to. Oh, that's the surprise. Oh my goodness." He was selling like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest." And of course, the surprise was none other than Wendy Richter, one of the creators of the so-called Rock and Wrestling Connection in the WWF in 1984, 1985. And this led to a whole bunch of cool matches, uh, that, 6-man mixed matches, and it just evolved into a pretty cool feud that is still remembered to this day. But I think most of the listeners that are from Puerto Rico will agree with me. The feud that possibly will be the biggest one they have here and the most remembered one was against the Primos, Ron and Chiqui Star. And it was a very contrast of ideological difference. There was a promo where Chiqui Star used what the people of the island used to think of people who listen to rock and roll music in the 70s and 80s. They're all smelly, they're all druggers, they're not good examples, that kind of stuff. The bad reputation that supposedly rock and rollers had during that time. In using that against the rock and roll RPMs, and you had the rock and roll RPMs spreading love to music and the fans, and the feud just clicked very good, and it was a very good feud between them. Uh, there was one of the highlights of many in this field because they had many. They had a tag team tournament Thanksgiving that was pretty cool. Uh, was that it was Mike Davis' sixth wedding anniversary, and the company had brought his wife and kids to the ring so he could show them to the fans because the fans loved the RPM so much. They wanted to see they wanted to see the family. Mike Davis talked. He introduced his wife, his kids, his two girls, and he thanked Puerto Rico for all the love that they had given the RPMs, that they were part of the family, that they had well received, and all this great stuff. And the company presented them with some gifts from the fans and from the company, as it was the sixth anniversary, and people were incredibly happy. Babies were being thrown in the air, sex was going on in the stands, all happiness, to this moment for Mike Davis, and it was well done by WWC, Capital Sports Promotion during that time. Tommy Lane, who was in the ring with them, decided to take the kids to the dressing room while Mike Davis and the wife will keep talking to the fans. When out of nowhere, the Primos came to the ring carrying a gift. And this segment is in YouTube, and you could check it out. And it was Chef Kiss, like the kids say today, cinema. It was a masterpiece. The Primos come to the ring and they grab the mic and say, "We come in peace. We heard it was your anniversary, and we just want to bring you a gift to you, and to remember this special day because it's your anniversary, your beautiful wife, your kids, and we're just here in peace and love to show you this." And they unwrap the gift, and it's a portrait of the RPMs with the World Tag Team titles. And Ron Stars, he turns around and he starts showing it to the crowd, while Chicky starts walking around the ring, back and forth. And Ron Star's like, "I want to give it to you." And when Davis was going to grab it, here comes Chicky Star hitting from the back, grabs it, and Ron Star just goes, bam, broke the portrait with the glass flying everywhere. I mean, there was glass flying everywhere. And proceed to beat the living daylights of Mike Davis in front of his wife. The wife tried to interfere, but Chicky Star grabbed her and threw her in the mat and continued the beating into Tommy Lane, made the save. The visual of Dr. Gonzalez, who was the doctor from the commission during that time, stitching Mike Davis in the locker room is one of the craziest visuals ever shown in TV. And both, I want to say, Bobby Jaggers and Hugo do a great job in the English commentary selling the angle. With Bobby Jagger saying, "You shouldn't bring your wife to the ring. You shouldn't bring your family. That's his fault." And Hugo saying, "Well, how can you do this? It was a special day, blah, blah, blah." I mean, it was just a great segment to further along the angle. And this brought some great and crazy matches between both teams. Finally, the Rock and Roll RPMs, of course, persevere and won the champion. This was super awesome. Established the RPMs as the fans' darling because everybody hated Chicky Star and Ron Star. The third feud was against the Chip Herders over the World Tag Team titles in a very good and exciting feud where they exchanged the titles in a couple of occasions until the Chip Herders finally won it from them. They left the island around 86, 87, according to Mike Davis, due to disagreements with Booker and Vader 1. And there's a shooting interview out there where Mike Davis just trashed Invader 1, Jose Gonzalez, and just destroys him completely for the way that allegedly he mistreated them during their run here in the island. Like we mentioned, the original Rock and Wrestling Girl connection from the WWF, Wendy Richter, came to the island and took the island by storm. She was introduced as she was the real-life wife, Hugo Sabinovich, which immediately made her an incredible fan favorite in the island, as she was married to the lead announcer, and Hugo Sabinovich during that time was a very popular announcer. She won the World Wrestling Council Women's title and had great feuds against the likes of Sacha, Monster Ripper, and other women wrestlers. For a period of 3 years, she was the top woman draw in the island, and to this day, she's remembered very fondly, and she's remembered very different from when she started. She started as a cowgirl when she first came to Puerto Rico and as a rule breaker, but during this time, she was like the most popular wrestler in the island, women's wrestler in the island. The third Rock and Wrestling tag team that we had in the island was the original one that led to all the other ones being called, the Midnight Rockers, the SNS Express, all the Rock and Roll PMs, everything. It was the Rock and Roll Express who have been the top tag team both in Mid-South and Jim Crockett. They came to the island in 1988 once they left on Jim Crockett over disagreements with Dusty Rhodes. And strangely enough, for some reason, they were not as popular as they were in the States here in the island. Maybe it was because their run was very inconsistent. They would come for a couple of shows and then leave and then come back. But for some reason, they were not as popular as, say, the New York Rockers or the Rock and Roll RPMs. It could have been that it was the third rock and roller tag team that came to the island, and we were already used to seeing the other two. There are many, many reasons, but for some reason, they didn't click as much as they did when they were in the States. They had a pretty good feud against the Kansas Jayhawks of Bobby Jaggers and Dan Crawford. There's a couple of matches somewhere in YouTube that I recommend you guys check it out. They're pretty good. There's an 8-man with the John Bloods against um, Bobby Jaggers and Dan Crawford and the Ninja Express. And there's also a couple matches between them too. And Armstrong Alley, also in the TV shows, have a couple good matches between them. Uh, Again, they didn't stay long. I was able to see them as they were alongside the Midnight Express, my favorite tag team. So, as a fan of them, I was happy to see them live during this time, but wish they could have stayed, a little bit longer during this run in 1998. The last tag team that used the Rockers team was a tag team called the Southern Rockers, who were also known as Well Done in the States, and they were composed by the wrestlers of Steve Dahl and Rex King that came to the island during a really, really bad time for wrestling in Puerto Rico. That was the year 1992. And they won the tag team titles from none other than Doug Masters and Ron Starr. But the run didn't last long as Steve Dahl left Puerto Rico after the title was declared vacant, after the Solid Gold interfered in one of those matches, and shortly after, leaving Rex King to tag with Ray Gonzalez to become the new tag team champions. What caused him to leave? Well, we're not sure. And there's not a lot of footage of that time. But strangely enough, as the moment that I'm taping this, little by little footage of that 1992 year of Capital Sports Promotion is making its way to Armstrong Alley. So hopefully pretty soon we can have a better picture of the run of the Southern Rockers here in the island during that year, 1992. With this, we conclude what's, this little podcast talking about the rock and wrestling connection here in the island during the 80s, during the golden years, and some of the tag teams that brought the rock and roll ideas to Puerto Rico during that time. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode, and in 2 weeks, we're going to come back with another one. I think I'm working on an interview, so hopefully that will come true. If not, it's going to be about one of the feuds of the late 80s that we're going to be talking about. So into then, I want to say thank you all for taking time of your busy day to listen or watch this podcast. And into 2 weeks from now, I'll say like Joaquin Padinho used to say, sayonara, amigos.